Oh, good morning.
Good morning.
It is so wonderful to be here. I can't tell you. I love doing this. It feels like I get to be completely myself and fully myself, especially in a place like this where there's so much love. And I've been here many years ago. I used to come when Renee and Marie were the ministers, and then I remember being here when Russell Highland performed the wedding for Ed and Jody, and I only got to meet Richard and Maureen once, had a wonderful evening with them when they were teaching a class across the hall. That was a privilege to even meet them. So this is a special place. But I have to tell you that coming here now after not being here for a long time, I feel so much more peace and presence and purpose and power in this space than I ever have before. It's like it continues to grow and continues to be nourished by the love that all of you are pouring into it. And I also want to thank these extraordinary musicians that, for me, music in a service is probably what takes me most deeply into that place of knowing, into that place of connecting with the divine. And so I love everything that you did today. If I seem a little hoarse, it's because I am. I've gone from the ridiculous to the sublime this week. I was in a crazy play for the last 2 weeks called Death Bed, the bed that eats. 3 times a night I'll get sucked into this bed, and have to flail around and go, my God, I'm being eaten alive. So I don't have a lot of voice left. Help me. But I'm here, and it's sublime to be here with you. I've been in this space before also. One of the things about Unity that I love and treasure so much is that you throw your doors open to people with all kinds of interesting beliefs, like myself. And I've led dances of universal peace here. Some people call it Sufi dancing. And I have been here lying on the floor with a group of people doing shamanic journeying, going to find our power animals in the lower world and our guides in the upper world. Not all churches are going to let you do that. That was pretty wonderful. I've also been here before and performed a one-woman show as a woman named Peace Pilgrim. If you've never heard of her or never read about her, I encourage you to go to peacepilgrim.org. She was an American woman. Some people called her the American Gandhi, or they called her an American saint. She basically, like in the song Imagine no possessions. All that she had when she began her pilgrimage, as she called it, was the clothes that she wore, a comb, toothbrush, and a ballpoint pen. And she walked around this country for 28 years talking to people about peace and teaching strongly that the way to peace in the world was for each of us to find inner peace and then radiate that. And when I met her in 1972, I met a lot of amazing spiritual people in my life, but I'd never seen someone like her. She came up to about here on me, or more like here. Light was just streaming off of her. She was that pure, she was that clear. Today what I'll be doing is just telling you some stories, not so much of a lecturer, just a storyteller. And what I just want to caution you, it might kind of sound like, well, I did this, and then I did that, and then I did this, and I did that. That's not what it's about. I think you'll see as the stories go along that it's not about me, it's about experiences I've had that are open to all of us if we're willing to be quiet and listen to the inner guidance that comes to us. I'll be talking about intuition, I'll be talking about divine guidance, but over the years, the line between those has kind of blurred. What it feels like to me is that when I have an intuition and I'm prompted to do or say or feel or be something, that prompting is actually coming from the divine within. It's actually coming from the Christ self or the higher self or that deep knowing place that connects with all that is divine. When I think of divine guidance, I think of it as perhaps a bit shinier or sparklier, or it feels like it's coming from the outside, when of course I'm not sure there really is an inside and an outside after all. But it all kind of comes together for me in this sense of knowing. Now some of us will get intuition like it's a feeling, almost in the solar plexus. You might You might have more third eye activity. You might see things or hear things or feel things in a way. But it doesn't really matter how it comes. The important thing for us to do is to learn to get quiet and to kind of slow down so that we can listen. And I'll give you a few examples of that. When I first moved to North Carolina in 1982, I've been hanging around with some Sufis for the first time, and a Sufi, just in a nutshell, is, you'll read about it in the encyclopedia. It will tell you it's the mystical branch of Islam. Well, there's another kind of Sufism which came to the West in 1910, and it really wasn't affiliated with any particular religion. What it meant to be in the Sufi order, which I've been initiated in, is that we seek to find God in everyone and everything. So any action toward us is taken as an action of God. And any reaction we have is taken as an action of God. So it means we want to really stay tuned into that and keep as clear and shiny and polished as we can. And of course we can't do that, but we try. And we have that intention. I met my first Sufis in 1981. By 1982, I decided to move to North Carolina, where there was a community of spiritual healers living together up in the mountains. And when I first came to North Carolina, the calling, the intuition, the guidance was so strong that I had a little red VW at the time. I packed up my bug with everything I owned, and I got ready to leave. And it was one of those, if you pray for rain, get out the umbrellas. Because I had gas in the car, but I didn't have any money once that tank of gas ran out. I got ready to go, and the morning I was set to leave, the mail came early that day, and in it was a note from my sister, who is about as different from me as you can imagine. She thinks most of my beliefs are strange stuff that girl believes. She's a lawyer. She's very practical, on top of things. But she had had a feeling, which she had listened to. And she said, I feel like it's really important for you to move to North Carolina. And I'm sending you a gas card, which you can use for gas or food or whatever you need along the way. So there was the passage. And when I got to North Carolina, I came in during daylight hours, this big welcome to North Carolina sign. And in broad daylight, there was an enormous owl sitting on the sign, facing North Carolina. And as I drove up to it, it turned and looked right at me. I was like, whoa, what's that all about? I'd had no training or no knowledge at that time of any Native American teachings. I didn't realize the significance of that. But the people I was going to stay with was a Sufi woman named Kahira, and the man who was with her named Thomas Raincrow. And I told Thomas Raincrow about the owl, and he was like, you're really supposed to be here. And he gave me an owl feather and explained to me the idea of a power animal or a totem. And the owl turned out later in my shamanic training and other kinds of training I took. The owl is a very important guide, a very important being that can help us connect with our intuition. In some Indian tribes, you'll hear the owl spoken of as the harbinger of death or a messenger of death or something scary. But a lot of that comes from missionaries that were looking to teach good and evil, and they kind of took the owl as something they could use. Whereas actually in many, many Native American languages, there isn't even a word for darkness. They call it the dark light. And the owl is the most powerful totem or power animal because it can see in the dark. So if you're given the owl as a protector or as a power animal, perhaps you have some darkness inside yourself, or some darkness in your past, or some fears that are really difficult to overcome, and the owl can see in the darkness and guide you through it. So that was my first hint of another kind of spirituality I had not even looked for. Some amazing things happened while I was living in the mountains. I was in a time in which I called radical trust and radical faith. I would do things like get in the car and start driving whether I had the money to pay for the gas or not. And I had sent money ahead so Kahira could rent a little cabin for us in the mountains. And we had enough to rent it for that first month, but we had no money to turn on the utilities. And one of the first things that happened is Kahira and I went to this thing, I think it was called Heritage Day, where you go and you meet and greet. There's arts and crafts, and there's, people making, doing blacksmithing and whatnot. And we ran into a friend of ours, a friend of hers, who had just gotten divorced quite painfully, and everything he owned basically was with his former wife. And he was talking to us, and he said, tell me about where you're living, and we told him, and he said, I don't really need a place to live, but about once a month when I'm not traveling and I come back into town, just maybe for 1 or 2 nights, I just need a floor to sleep on. Could I come and stay at your house? And we said, sure, He said, what can I do for you? We said, well, we're doing good, but we don't have the water turned on, and we don't have the power turned on. He said, oh, I'll pay the deposits on the utilities and get things started. So that was great. There was other times when living in that little mountain cabin when, I remember one night we actually ran out of food. It was actually in the afternoon, and what we had in the house, Kahira was an herbalist, lots of dried herbs hanging from the ceiling in the kitchen, about a half a stick of butter in the refrigerator. That was it. She's like, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? And I said, well, are you hungry right now? No. Okay. So nothing to worry about, We'll see later in the day if we're hungry, we'll see what happens, I'm sure there'll be plenty. And long about the time it started getting dark and we started thinking, yeah, it'd be nice to have something to eat. A friend drove up in front of the house and he came in and said, man, I was just at the grocery store and I saw these incredible squashes. I got you some, and I got me some. And of course we had butter and herbs, so we had a big old squash feast. I think a lot of us learn fear in childhood. We get taught that at one level or another, there's not enough. We are not enough. There's not enough food. There's not enough new clothes. There are not enough things. There's not enough time, how we get caught in that as adults. There's not enough support. There's not enough love, all those things. And we carry that with us into our lives. But if we can learn to tune into our intuition and really, as the music told us today, let go and trust. What we truly need will be provided for us. And I was saying in the first service that it's so funny in preparing these stories for you. The other thing that kept coming in this week, I thought, well, gosh, maybe I should change the name of this from Intuition and Divine Guidance to Let It Go. Because I've had some things in my life lately that I just have to let them go. I can't control them, I can't fix them, I can't change them. Little sticky notes pasted around where I see them. It says, let go. Some things that helped me along the way when I was learning to let go were some of the Unity teachings, books by Catherine Ponder. I'm sure a lot of you have read Catherine Ponder's books. Florence Scovel Shinn, who had some wonderful, wonderful things to say about release, and also about being open to receive and letting yourself really be blessed by Spirit, be blessed by God, be blessed by the universe. Even when we think we don't deserve it, those blessings are just trying to pour into our lives. And one of the ways that I began to receive guidance over the years was, as I was telling you earlier, through hymns. My brother, when we were growing up, my older brother John, had one of those little Bibles. It was the King James Version. It actually had a zipper on it. It was so cool. Zip it open. And wherever Jesus spoke, the words were not black, they were red. Any of you ever have a Bible like that or see one? Yeah, so whenever the Master spoke, the words were in red. And what began to happen for me was that I'd be pondering some problem or concerned about something, and I would hear a little piece of a hymn in my head. I'd have to keep humming it for a little while to figure out, what is that hymn? What's the... Oh, and then I could remember the first line, and then I could go look it up. And one time, when things were really tight financially, and I was just trying to practice radical trust, radical faith, I had this little hymn come in my head. And this week, I wanted to tell you about it, and I couldn't remember the first line of the hymn. I could get the tune, but I couldn't remember the first line. And I thought, how am I going to look it up if I don't know the first line? Well, in the mail this week came something from my mother, Jean, who passed in March. And it was a mailing for her, and inside the mailing was a little bookmark. And here it says on the bookmark, God moves in a mysterious way, his wonders to perform, which is the first line of the hymn that I wanted to tell you about. So thank you, Jean. Thank you, whoever mailed this to us. I'm going to read you this, and really, it's the second verse that's so amazing in here, and this is the second verse lit up red for me when I went to read it in the hymn book. And you probably know some of these words. God moves in a mysterious way, his wonders to perform. He plants his footsteps in the sea and rides upon the storm. And this was the part for me, and I had to laugh. It's what my brother calls God gets cute. Ye fearful saints, fresh courage take. The clouds ye so much dread are big with mercy and shall break in blessings on your head. Okay. Not just like, here's something that's like, okay, I got it, damn, blessing. All right, so I won't read the rest of it, but just to know that, those blessings are out there, and they may look like dark clouds. Well, they're dark because they're full, and they're about to break on your head. So. I've also learned to pay attention to little snippets of scripture that come into my mind, just a few words, and then I can look it up, and then often part of the scripture will just light up. It will seem to jump off the page at me, and I'm like, oh, okay, that's what I needed. There are other stories I could tell you that I didn't get into in the first service, and I think I might spare them. I might spare you them as well, because there's stories about dowsing with a pendulum, and stories about finding an apartment using a Ouija board one time. Oh, that would really freak out my sister if she heard that. I mean, it spelled out an address for me. Come on. Which to me means that divine guidance will use any avenue we open up. If I had lit candles and I was in a very sacred atmosphere, I'm like, my God, I have to move tomorrow and I haven't found a place yet. Okay. So, it's like, thank you. I'll take it. Dreams can be guidance, as you well know. There are certain dreams we have that feel more powerful or more special or more particular than the other dreams we have that are just kind of like taking the trash out, from whatever happened during the day, and subconscious goes, ooh, let's move that through the dreamscape and get it out the door. Some of the dreams are really either prophetic or comforting or helpful. Some of the dreams I've had when loved ones have passed have been particularly wonderful. But usually my people, when they cross over, they don't bother to wait for a dream state. They're just like, just go ahead and hand it to me during the day. Hey, I'm here. Why? What are you doing here? I've also heard a voice sometimes, and sometimes it's challenging to follow that voice. I was doing storytelling up in the mountains one time, driving my little red bug around, and I heard, it's time to sell your car. It's time to sell my car? It's time to sell your car. And when I heard the voice the third time, that was it. Made a couple phone calls and the car was sold. I was married at the time, and I did call my husband and say, I'm going to sell the car. And he said, why? I said, I heard the voice. Oh, go. He knew me by that point. He knew I had lots of squirrely things going on, but he'd learned to trust those as well. I'm just going to tell you one more story. And before I do, I just want to say so much of this for me, intuition and divine guidance, is about learning to feel the truth, how it resonates internally. You get a sense of resonance, or you get a sense of that light that we all have within us gets a little brighter when we start moving toward something we're being guided to do. And I really feel that, as one of my Sufi teachers said, the more light that we're given and the more light that we radiate out, then more light is given. And you can become like my friend Peace Pilgrim, who just was streaming light all of the time. This last story I want to tell you is one that's very special to Jody. I don't know if you've ever heard me tell it, Jody. I know you heard my mom tell it. But my mother, Jean, was briefly part of this congregation. She was pretty shy. She found it kind of hard to be in groups of people. But she had been real connected to a Unity church back in Kansas when she lived there. And my mom had always been kind of skeptical about religion, and especially about Christianity. It was just, what's that thing about being on the cross and dying for other people's sins? I don't get that. But she wanted to believe. She wanted to believe something. And she went to the Unity Church that was a real open-hearted, beautiful place like this one, where people of all degrees of doubt and faith were welcome. And she met a young woman there that had a prayer circle at her home every Thursday night, and Mom started going to that and really loved it. And one of the processes they did was the mastermind process, which of course is a Unity thing many of you are familiar with, where you gather with a group of people, you state your intentions, what it is you need to manifest, and you pray as a group, and that power really builds. And my mom had gone to the group for probably several months before she finally said, you know, I've got something I really need help with. She said, she and her mother had a very difficult relationship. And basically when Mom was pregnant with me, she had a nervous breakdown. And my dad, who did not like Grandma at all, went and got her and brought her to live with us, to take care of Mom as well as the new baby. And Grandma stayed on. Mom and Dad wanted her to leave and wanted her to leave, and she didn't, and she never did. So there they were living in that house where Dad and Grandma just really didn't even talk to each other. And Mom tried to play in between. And she had, you know, childhood trauma and then this present tension. She just had a really difficult relationship with her mother. And so she said to the group, this is what I want your prayers for. I want to be able to love my mother. Can't, but I want to be able to love my mother. And the teacher said, oh guys, this is a big one, okay. Everybody get together now, we're going to pray for this. And they did the mastermind and they prayed. And Mom came home that night, and Grandma's habit was to sit near the door. So when we kids came home from school or Mom came home from a class, Grandma was so lonely, really, and depressed and hungry, that as soon as anybody walked in the door, I was like, what have you been doing? She wanted it. You know, she wanted what we were getting, and she wasn't getting. And so Mom came home, and she walked in, and there's Grandma. Well, how was your prayer group tonight? Mom was kind of gritting her teeth. And my mother heard a voice, and it said, put your arms around your mother and tell her you love her. And Mom was like, I can't. I don't. That would be a lie. I can't do that. And they went in the kitchen, and Mom put some water on the stove to make some tea. She's lighting up the stove, and she hears, put your arms around your mother and tell her you love her. Can't do that. Then she heard it a third time. And she had been taught that when you hear something 3 times, you've got to do it. You know, whether you want to or not, put your arms around your mother and tell her you love her. So Grandma was sitting at the kitchen table, and Mom walked over and stood in front of her and said, I love you, Mom. And my grandmother leapt up and grabbed my mother, and she was not an affectionate person, grabbed her and held onto her and just sobbed. And said, I've always loved you. I could never tell you. I'm sorry. I've been such a horrible mother. Please forgive me. I love you so much. I love you. And the two of them just wept and wept. And then they began to laugh. And they're like, okay, well, we've got some time left. You know, come on, let's get with it. And the next time I came home to visit my family in Kansas, I saw something that just moved me so deeply. I saw my father get up in the morning. Mom was in the kitchen, Grandma was still lying in her bed. I saw my father get up and walk down the hall, and he stopped in Grandma's doorway and he said, good morning, Mom, how are you? And I had to go in the other room and weep because I'd never seen my father speak kindly to my grandmother. His habit had been, if she asked for someone to pass the butter at the supper table, he pretended she hadn't spoke. Because in his universe, it was better that she didn't exist. And he moved through that because of the healing between Jean and Beta. Then Eric Henry got it as well, and he was able to extend love to her as well. So when we listen to that voice, whether it seems to come from without or seems to come from within, it will take us places we never dreamed were possible to go. And so I encourage you all to do that, to listen and find where you end up, find out what you can experience. If you will join me in prayer for a moment. Our dearest God, we love you so much and we feel your love. We ask you to give us the courage and the strength to open our hearts and open our minds and let our experience be vaster than we thought it could be, so that we can hear that still, quiet voice within. And also accept if the lesson comes a little more strongly than that, And we say, boy, God, I need help on this one. And if you would just really grab me and shake me, I would sure appreciate it, because I need all the help I can get. So we thank you for that guidance. We thank you for our love. Thank you. Just for everything. Thank you.